Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, magical ones. Welcome, welcome. In today's modern spiritless society, magical women are often living in hiding from their power and magic for fear of being outcast and burned at the stake. They sell themselves short, giving away their souls in return for love, approval, and security, leaving themselves burned out, burdened, and longing for a life of more, but feeling powerless to create it. I've walked that path, so I've created a portal to help magical women harness their power and discover their gifts so that they can reclaim their radiance. Our Facebook community is a safe and alchemical altar space filled with sisterhood, liberation, and magic. So why not head over and join us by searching Secret Witch Circle on Facebook. We'll see you there. My guest today is the brilliant Lucy H Pearce. Driven by a need to create, connect and inspire, Lucy is a best-selling author of many books including Burning Woman, Creatrix, Medicine Woman and She of the Sea. She is also a vibrant artist, respected publisher and editor and founder of Womancraft Publishing. Her work focuses on self-knowledge and healing through creativity, archetypes and cyclical living. She gives voice to the soul, the spiritual, the liminal, the darkness and discomfort, and the magical in the midst of the mundane. Often described as raw, authentic and life-changing, her work encourages authentic paths to self-expression and is celebrated particularly by highly sensitive and neurodivergent women. In this episode, we dived into how to engage with shadow to reclaim our power, including the power of harnessing archetypes, the importance of getting naked and returning to our truth, and how to integrate shadow in a loving way so that we can embrace our witch queen. Let's dive in. Lucy, welcome. I've been so excited to have you on the show, and I know you were recommended to me as a guest, but quite magically I have been reading your amazing books and also kind of unknowingly actually been creating journeys for women around them. So I have Invoke Your Witch Queen, Invoke Your Wild Creatrix and Invoke Your Medicine Woman. So
well, there we go.
It feels like the deepest alignment to have you here to talk to us about power and magic. So welcome. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you.
And I guess to just dive in, I was going to ask you first to just share a little bit about your journey. We can see where we go from there in terms of what gets created in this conversation. Just love to hear about you experiencing your own power and learning to engage with your shadow.
So for me, my magic, which is how I would term it now, has been always deeply tied up with my creativity, my spirituality, and my sexuality. And I learned early on that all of those things weren't quite right. Like I wasn't showing up as I should, as a normal person should in the world. I learned that as a teenager and got called a lot of names, weirdo, fruitcake, lesbian, all the lovely names that teenagers call other teenagers to get them to go back in a box. So I shut all of my powers down. Like I didn't. So I was very creative as a teenager and then shut it down in my early 20s. And you could even see that in the way I dressed. Like, I went from wearing fabulous like flared cords, 4 different colors, and patchwork jeans, and t-shirts with spirals on them, and things that really spoke to me in terms of color and pattern, to very kind of dull clothes. And I trained to be a teacher, and I really wanted to just be able to fit in and be normal. And to me, that was me being a good girl. That was me being safe. That was me playing acceptable. That was me trying to be an adult, and trying to get rid of all of the things that didn't fit in, that made other people around me uncomfortable, and therefore made me uncomfortable. And it felt much safer to do that. And so I worked really hard. I used all of my energy to shove that down or to run away from that. And then for me, the shift started to happen when, and it's something that like society doesn't warn you about, tell you about at all, but my creativity, sexuality, and spirituality were all reignited when I was pregnant. And instead of turning into this ideal mother, the perfect mother that I was trying so hard to, this other part of me, like this magical, libidinous, sacred part of me, was waking up energized and wanting to be out in the world. And so I had this real battle, because obviously if you don't have kids, you have more space to express that. Whereas if you're a new mother, like all of your time, attention, energy is supposed to be and is on this tiny creature. And so having this deep urge needing to come through you at the same time is really challenging, because you don't have the time or the energy or the space for it. You don't have the societal approval of it, because the one thing you're supposed to do is to sacrifice yourself on the altarhood of motherhood, the altar of motherhood. And so I found that really challenging. And with each child that came along, this drive got bigger, and it would not be shut up anymore. And it kind of felt like the reason it scared me was not just because it didn't make me a good girl, it didn't make me a good mother, but that there was a power with it, which was so bigger than me, didn't play by the rules that I was trying to play by. And I was scared that it would overtake me, it would consume me, that I would go crazy, I would go mad. And so there was this thing that if I could control it, then I and everyone around me would be safe. And if I didn't control it, if I couldn't control it, then I would go mad, I would die, my carefully curated life of, husband and children and home would disintegrate. And so the fear was that large and the stakes were that high, because I desperately wanted this life that I'd created, and I desperately needed this other inner life too. I needed both. I need the outer for my physical stability, for basic human belonging, safety, they're my family. And I need the other for my sanity, my soul, my being able to live in this crazy world. I need to have my self-expression of creativity, magic, libidinous, all of that. I need to have it. So it was a real battle between having learned to shut that down and shut that off, and knowing that I needed to let it out, and learning, I was going to say how to do it safely. There's not a safe way to do it, but to do it in a way that didn't destroy me. And that is still my journey, much further along now. But like, that power doesn't get any smaller. That magic doesn't get any less wild. It's still enormous and thrilling and terrifying when you're working with it. So for me, that was it's been a 10-15 year journey of one step after the other, coming out from being the good girl, coming out from masking, which learning that I was neurodiverse, that I'm autistic and ADHD, really helped, because those of us who have got through to adulthood and not been diagnosed, we've done it because we're good at masking, we're good at covering up, we're good at play acting normal as much as we can, and it's only our neurodiversity that seeps through the cracks when we are really stressed, when we're really overwhelmed, and people say, whoa, what's wrong with her, why is she being weird? But the rest of the time we can do a pretty good job of putting on a facade of normal. So for me, the coming out as autistic, coming out as myself in my sexuality, coming out as myself as a witch, as an artist, as a creatrix, has been a very parallel journey. It's like one can't be done without the other. Like it's kind of all or nothing, but it's how to do that journey while still ensuring that your human self feels safe enough, and yet you're learning to be more and more authentically you publicly. But still the fear is enormous. Still the sense of impending shame, impending doom is vast. And, to do something. So for me, the written word is much safer than the spoken word, than being out in the world. So I chose to move from teaching into writing for several years, because that was how I could most deeply connect to my magic, my truth, my authentic self, and express it. But then you've got these books, these portals to this more authentic you out in the world, which you have no control over. And for somebody who wants safety, like, yeah, that's not much fun, because you can't withdraw them at any point. They're there as testament to what you think, what you believe, what you've done. So they're a pretty good way of outing your authentic self, if you choose to put your authentic self into them.
Feels like, yeah, so much liberation in that, in what you've described there. Even I think you putting your books out there feels like a really liberating thing in general for the part of you that wants to stay safe. Gosh, there's so much in that I'm just trying to feel into where to go. It's really interesting to me. There was so much synchronicity with the pregnancy element here, because that was almost when my witch queen was birthed as well. So that's really interesting, that it's almost like that we've come to this portal in life where there's this initiation, and it's almost like we're also being rebirthed as we're birthing something into the world. So
it's an energetic thing that happens that we're not told about in Western culture at all. Like, it's an energetic shift, and it's no coincidence that, like, it happens in the womb space, which is the crucible of creativity. It's the cauldron of power in a woman's body, and that it's happening through the sexual organs. Like, unless you have a cesarean, like, the baby is both, it goes in through the vagina and it comes out through the vagina, which is like a passage to power. It's a enormous physical opening, which is vast. It's far more than just a stretching of tissues. Like, it touches on our deepest selves, both physically our deepest selves. Like, most of us are never going to see our womb spaces. Most of us are never going to see the interior of our vaginas. And yet this life, this magical seed, is implanted, grows without our conscious effort within us. And then we have to partner with these forces beyond ourselves in order to release that new life out into the world. And it's happening through some of the most energetically charged parts of ourselves, like our sexual organs. So, like, why wouldn't it be so big and massive? The incredible thing is that we're just not taught that.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of mind-blowing. Wow. So There's also something in the kind of idea of the good girl, because I think that's something that our listeners will really relate to, this sense of like feeling like we really have to stay as the good girl, which, by the way, I don't know if you mind me mentioning that. I just feel like you've liberated that so much because you've just shown up today to our recording naked. So
Absolutely. There we go. I was like, if there's anyone I can turn up to naked, it's this one. So it's like, but I mean, that's what the whole of Burning Woman is about getting naked and not being afraid of it anymore, both emotionally, spiritually, physically, like showing up in your skin as you are without needing to hide, without the shame, without the fear, just showing up as you. And not only doing it, you know, like, it's often in the Western world, this can all kind of come down to something very individualistic. And it is on one level, because we're each walking the path, we're doing the journey ourselves. But it's more than that. Like, it's a collaborative, it's a communal thing. So the Burning Woman journey is about stepping into the firelight with our sisters, like with other people, each showing up as ourselves, so that we can see we're not alone. We can see that there is nothing, genuinely nothing shameful or wrong or weird about us. We are literally just people. And like, the way we have been oppressed by patriarchal society as women and as people in general has been through shame, through silencing, through fear, this making us wrong on a base level, that we feel we have to cover up for, make up for that deep inherent wrongness. And that's where I think a lot of us learn to be the good girl. Because I was re-listening to your first podcast, and it was really interesting because our stories are very, very similar. And you were talking about your dad left when you were very young, and you know, my parents separated when I was 1 year old. And a big, like, my father was always in my life. He was very engaged, but he lived in a different country. So I would have to travel backwards and forwards to see him. I would only see him, you know, 2 to 4 times a year. And so for me, that, oh Lord, I'm feeling the tears coming up here. That terror of losing somebody who you love, losing somebody who is so fundamental to your being, and knowing that the reason that they separated was because they didn't love your mother was anymore, that they couldn't be with your mother anymore, is, it sets you on a path to have to reject a major part of yourself, anything that resembles your mother, so that you can be acceptable to your father, so that he won't leave you too. And that desire to be loved and accepted and not abandoned again is so vast. So that desire to play the good girl, so that you retain that love as much as you can. Like, we can trivialize being good girls. We can trivialize, like, oh, well, I didn't want to get into trouble. But it's deep. It's really deep. It's that absolute need to keep yourself safe, to keep your world together, to keep the people you love with you, so that you are safe as a small child. And we bring that on through as adult women, to keep our partners safe, to keep our children safe, to keep the authorities off our backs. And I know that at the root of so much of what drives me is still that deep desire to keep approval and safety, because to be a wild woman in the world on my own terms is still dangerous. It's not safe. So each time we strip off a mask, each time we dare to stand up to authority, each time we express ourselves in a way that other people might not find acceptable, feels like a genuine risk. And it is. It can be. And it is. each time we do it and we learn that everything hasn't gone, we gain more of our power back.
Really, yeah, loving what you, yeah, bless you. I really feel that. Yeah, it's so similar. Yeah, it feels like what you're speaking to there is almost like, yes, it is scary, and it's something that we still choose into in order to be fully ourselves.
Well, it's a price. Being a good girl is a price. You receive approval, you receive acceptance, but of something that is not truly you. So you can choose to pay that price, so you know you're safe, loved, and accepted, but that's not really you. So there's large parts of yourself you have to hide in order to maintain that safety, love, and approval. Or you can risk having your real self seen and rejected. Like, how hard is that, to have your real, authentic self rejected? Like, that feels like psychological death to a lot of us, which is why we cover it up, to be, you know, more acceptable, more like how we should be. But if you have your real self seen, loved, and accepted, it is so much more nurturing and nourishing and safe, because there is nothing left to hide, because you are in a deep relationship of trust and respect with those who have seen you. And so the gifts of it are inexplicable, indescribable for people who haven't experienced it. But the fear and the danger you have to go through to get there is so vast too. So I fully understand why people wouldn't take that journey if they have been too traumatized in the past, if they have too much to lose. I understand it. Like, there is no judgment there. And it doesn't have to be a one-time thing. It doesn't have to be a burn all your boats thing. Like, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be your authentic self at somebody else. It doesn't have to be a kind of a performance. Like, the whole point is that we learn to be good girls. We learn to hide our magic over a long period of time, and the unmasking goes the other way. You know, it's a long process of pulling away the veils, testing the waters, expressing ourselves, showing our true selves to people who it's safe to do that with first, rather than the whole world. You know, and gradually we are more and more able to do that on a bigger and bigger platform, until we are just doing that each day. And still there'll be layers that we want to keep covered, and that's fine. Like, privacy is fine. Once it's not driven by shame, once it's, you know, driven by just a boundary, you know, a boundary that actually this isn't for the world.
I love that. And what it feels like you're pointing to is that there's this kind of, really just, it's about consciously choosing it, and then loving ourselves through all of it, through all of that choice, whatever that choice is. Because at the moment, largely it's unconscious. So this is about kind of fully choosing it with whatever we,
so you're not hiding a part of yourself because you're ashamed of it. You're hiding a part of yourself because it's private to yourself, and that's fine. Or it's a power that you want to work with in a different way. So it's a, as you say, it's a conscious thing. It's a conscious choice. And when we mask or hide ourselves as good girls, that's through shame and through fear. Whereas if we choose to put a boundary of privacy around certain parts of ourselves in a way to protect ourselves, as a way of loving that part of ourselves so that it can be freer, not being in the public eye, that's very different. There's no shame involved. It's just, you know, we all have different parts of ourselves that we share in different ways. But it's, the difference is that fear, that shame, that needing to hide it or else has gone. Instead, it's a loving protection. It's a you're being a guardian to parts of yourselves. And you are consciously choosing, and you are engaging with them in different realms, but just perhaps not in the public eye, or not with these particular people.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And actually, we did have a community question from my Facebook group, which may be good and relevant to ask at this point. So the question was basically around how can we ease ourselves into shadow work when it's tough to look there and we can't always see our shadow. So she felt it was very hard for some stuff to be revealed.
Okay. First, that's a fabulous question. So I hope I'm going to be able to do it credit with a response.
I'm certain that you will.
When I was re-listening to your first podcast, what came up for me was this, that we are taught to be afraid of the dark, of darkness of all sorts, including in racist ways, including in like night and day ways, like women are not supposed to go out in the dark because bad shit's going to happen to them. So we're taught to be afraid of the dark on all levels. And one of the basic tenets to me of reclaiming the inner witch is being able to find comfort and power and magic in the dark. So when we talk about shadow, there is this association obviously with darkness. So initially we're having to get more comfortable with what has been forbidden, what has been restricted for us as women. So there's that piece about darkness and the shadow. But the second piece is that to what extent is the shadow darkness when we actually get really close to it? And to what extent is it some sort of energetic distortion, a distortion of signal? So rather than not being able to see something because it's hidden in the dark, my feeling is when I get close to something that I have been taught is unacceptable, shameful, fearful, what happens to me is both I lose my ability to have inner vision. So I do lose that inner seeing, which is a strong part of my inner knowing because I'm a very visual person. So I lose that, but I also lose energetic signal with myself. It's like an airplane flying in a storm and it loses contact with the air traffic control. It's like there is no communication direct to ground anymore. Everything is scrambled and we have no signals we can follow, all of our internal senses are gone. And it's very disorienting because we can't get close to it because it's frying our ability to get close to it. We're not able to see it. We're not able to hear what it is. We're not able to feel what it is. And so that's really disorienting and it's really scary because we have no inner guidance system at that point. And usually the closer we get to it, unless we're in a therapeutic situation where we have somebody who's guiding us from the outside and being able to keep that signal going backwards and forwards to us, we can get very lost in that. And so we will pull back fast so that we can get to a place where we are more familiar with, where we have signals that can help guide us. So one part is becoming familiar with that sensation and knowing that it's not going to kill you, knowing that it isn't a life and death threat, even though it is really overwhelming and strange. And then what we do is we learn to, when we're in that space, we learn to be able to kind of switch into a deeper sensing, which enables us to just go little by little into that territory. And we learn to be able to maybe take down a word or two that comes to us as we're approaching it, or an image that might flash really fast. And we're not expecting a full narrative. We're not expecting a full understanding, but we are gathering tiny bits of information that we can then bring back and work with, so that next time we can go a little bit further in. I talk about this process in She of the Sea, so I talk about the inner and the outer sea, and often women go to the outer sea when they're processing grief, big emotions, because there is this sense of the water element being able to help us process emotion, but also being able to put us in perspective. Like, we're very small in a vast space. But those help us to access the inner sea, which is the depths of ourselves, which, so like most of us swim along on the surface most of the time. But if you dive deep, deep, deep down, like, suddenly the world is weird. There is no light. The creatures are strange. They all like have flashing lights. Like, it's not a world that we know or understand. And so I use that image, that metaphor, as a way of explaining how we can approach the shadow self. The deep unconscious self is like, you can't breathe down there. You can't use your normal outer eyes down there. They don't work. Sound is distorted. You have to adjust your senses, but you can't, like, unless you've got an oxygen supply, which would be a therapist or something, you can't do that on one breath for very long. So you have to free dive down, you go down, you acclimatize, you can see a little bit, you come back up, but you can't live down there. You have to learn bit by bit how to be down in those depths. Does that help?
I love that so much. I love it on so many levels, because even just the bit about the sea, I've been guiding my medicine women in my crucible at the moment, last week or the week before, I can't remember. We've basically been working through different queendoms, I called them, which one of them was sea queendom or salt queendom, which was all about that, really. So yeah, it just gave me goosebumps, because I was like, oh, I hadn't even actually read She of the Sea, which now I'm like, I totally need to read that.
Well, you need to, yeah.
I've read the others, but yeah.
So She of the Sea is, I think you'll love it, because it is about reclaiming magic. Like, on its base level, that's what it's about. And for me, it was one of my scariest, after Burning Woman, it was my scariest of books to write, because it was sharing so many deep internal parts of myself, which I felt could be shamed so easily especially by people in my local area. I'd written about our local seashore, so I knew that there would be local people reading it who wouldn't be used to my work, the sort of things I do and write about. And suddenly I was not just talking about the literal sea, the ocean, the seashore, the place that I go to come back to myself. And I write about that in a lot of detail, but also writing about magic, writing about the deep feminine, writing about reclaiming our connection to that through water, through the ocean, through sea. And it's like, this is going to be pretty weird to a lot of people if they're not used to, if they haven't journeyed with me, through the fears and coming out of Burning Woman, through the medical coming out and identification of myself as neurodivergent through Medicine Woman. If they haven't been on that journey with me, like, they're going to be out at sea wondering where the hell they are.
I love that. That's now on my list. I'm going to order that after this conversation. Magical. Yeah, what struck me as you were talking actually about almost this, is really how the way what came up actually in our group Crucible, funnily enough, this week as well, was this sense of almost being able to, when we talk about archetypes, and all your work is centered around archetypes, there's almost a sense of my women journey to witch queen, and so I have them kind of embodying the witch queen energy to be able to then go into shadow, to be able to hold themselves through that, which kind of seemed similar to what you were talking about there, actually.
That's a really good idea, because that's a power to go down with. I guess my query would be is if you can't touch that in yourself yet, if you don't know what that feels like, then to be able to hold that energetically and imaginatively whilst you're then immersing yourself would be tricky. But if you can touch that power, and if you know what that archetype feels like, if you are able to embody it, then that is a really powerful way to journey down into that material.
It's really interesting. I was chatting with my coach actually yesterday about how witches in particular seem to be able to really like hold different archetypes and really embody them more powerfully than other magical archetypes. She was actually saying. So it's quite interesting. But that's kind of probably something aside from this conversation, but it's quite interesting because I've noticed that it's almost the gift of having these extreme emotions as well, if that makes sense.
I think also being, I've seen a big crossover between the neurodivergent community. So that is not only those of us on the spectrum or with ADHD, but also dyslexic, dyspraxic, people whose brains work a little differently to the neurotypical brain. And for a lot of women our age, they might not know that they fit into that category because our age of women was not diagnosed as children. Boys were, girls weren't. So, you know, you might be listening to this thinking, well, I'm not autistic, or I'm not ADHD, you know, because you are using the framework that you might have learned about in the 80s and 90s through films, through medicalization, and you might not quite be aware of how many boxes you tick. And this isn't about medicalizing everybody. This isn't about giving everyone a diagnosis. This is about understanding how your brain and your energy, your sense of self work in this world, and why you might struggle with some, in quote unquote, normal things that other people seem to be able to do no problem at all. So just as an aside to that, so I have noticed a big overlap between the witchy community and the neurodivergent community. We seem to have both a lot of the skills required for magic making and witchiness, the ability to shapeshift, which again I write about a lot in She of the Sea. You know, women on the whole have to shapeshift a lot anyway, just to survive in a patriarchal world. Neurodiverse people really have to shapeshift in order to survive. So our ability to go between archetypes is something that we learn to do quite early on, to shift between different ways of being, different personalities almost, so that we fit in. And often neurodivergent women are described as quite chameleon-like because we're very good at being able to mask certain parts of ourselves and reflect back almost the colors of the people around us. And that is both mental work, but it's also an energetic thing to be able to shift your energy that consciously. And so that is why I think that archetype work is very powerful and very natural feeling to an awful lot of people who are involved in magic, in witchcraft, in psychology, especially Jungian psychology. It's a very natural way of operating for us, and it's something that when you have the language for it, is even more helpful. So once you can put words and images to what this is that you're doing, and therefore be able to do it more consciously, and therefore be able to also choose between the archetypes that you are embodying, it's really powerful work.
Yeah, I love that. It really feels like if we've got that gift as witches or as neurodiverse people, that really is quite powerful for us to be able to hone to create what it is that we want to create. That feels magical in itself. And
in our culture, like I sorry, just the final piece of that puzzle is that when we move from living a mundane to a magical life, the reason we are trapped in mundanity is that we are trapped in the small amount of archetypes that we as women are allowed to inhabit. So that might be wife, it might be the servant of some sort, it might be martyr, it's teacher, it's nurse, it's mother, it's grandmother. There's very few. Oh, and princess, of course. Princess, good girl. You know, there's very few boxes we're allowed to fit into. There's an awful lot of us that is required to be disconnected from in order to fit into those boxes. So my work is about reclaiming the lost archetypes of the feminine. So archetypes that have existed throughout human history in cultures around the world, which hold power for us as women, which have been forbidden or shamed or scorned within Western patriarchal culture. So it's reclaiming the power and the energy that is in each of those. So when we reclaim these lost archetypes of the feminine, when we reclaim these other ways of being in the world, these other facets of feminine power, we are reclaiming our magic, we are reclaiming our power, which has been denied, dismissed, kept very small and safe. So archetypal work is magical work on a base level because you are freeing up energy and you are learning to embody that energy. And often what you're doing is you're working directly with word and image in order to conjure more of this energy, in order to be able to embody and inhabit it. And that's what so much of my work is about, is the word and image work as ways of naming and reclaiming energetic parts of myself which have been under the radar, have been in shadow, have been in shame, have been in the unconscious, and bringing them out into the world. I talked about it a little bit there when I was talking about when you're diving into the sea and you're having to use different senses and you're picking out a word or an image. Like, magical workers have always used words, magic words, and magic images or symbols to be able to channel and harness power. And that's what we're doing in archetypal work.
That is gorgeous. Yeah, really, really feel that. I was just one of the questions that I was wanting to ask you was about the witch wound and how that's like held in ourselves. Is there anything that you got to speak to on that? Because I got very interested in epigenetics and how that's kind of like passed down. Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to say to that.
So I go into that in quite a bit of detail, or as much detail as my knowledge and research is able to do in Burning Woman. And to be able to phrase it now is going to be tricky because my brain isn't quite there. But what I will say is one of the main reasons I wrote Burning Woman was because time and time again, I was seeing women responding to fear, pain, shame, trauma, as though it was a literal burning. And it was like, you know, that they were literally going to be burned as a witch. And it was this feeling of, this runs really, really deep in us. This isn't just about this lifetime. This isn't just about, you know, worrying what your dad thinks about you in this lifetime. I mean, this runs much deeper than this lifetime. Can I share a few words from Burning Woman just to kind of try and put a little voice to that? But this was me 5 years ago, having reflected on it deeply, rather than sitting naked talking on a podcast. When I learned my alphabet, W was for witch, the archetypal burned woman, there in front of my preschool eyes. R wasn't for rapist, or P for pedophile or psychopath, but there it was, W for witch. We are taught about the dark feminine early. We imbibe the warning of the witch in our nursery stories. Beware the solitary woman who lives in the forest, casts spells, and will eat human children for breakfast. And as a perceived pretender to patriarchal power, of course she was depicted in a silly black hat with a phallic broomstick pointing out from between her legs. Want to discredit a woman in the real world? All you need is one word: witch. still in the 21st century. Just this week, an Australian federal minister called a respected political journalist who wrote about a sexism scandal that a senior colleague had just resigned over a mad fucking witch. The W word has been a one-word death sentence to women for centuries. The fire starter. It has been used to condemn women who inhabit the outlying edges of our patriarchal culture and who flatly refuse to have their lives decided for them. It has been used to shame and silence those of us who speak up, as well as those who chose not to marry or have children, who healed using unknown means, who cursed the wielders of power for their inhumanity, who attended deaths and births, or have followed their own spiritual and sexual impulses. The witch represents the patriarchal fear of women's power, embodied in an individual. She who must be destroyed so that society can prosper. The witch, aka a powerful woman, has been pitched as a direct threat to the carefully constructed male-dominated system of divine right. And so the system has done everything within its power to erase, discredit, and disconnect women who exhibit any form of power and label them witches, with society's blessing. Because throughout history, where women have never been considered as human as men, witches were not human at all. They do not deserve our pity or defense, we are told. We are well rid of them. They would destroy everything we hold dear, and so we must destroy them first. We have been told enough fairy stories in our girlhood to know to beware of the witch. We have read enough history to know that as women, we don't want to be mistaken for her. The desire to live, to be accepted, and to belong keeps most of us in our places. And so we spend our lives running from the darkness, trying our hardest to be good and work hard and keep others happy. And it's that we've learned from history. We've learned through our school books. We've learned through our nursery stories, as well as having this epigenetic, deep level trauma that we can't even touch with our minds. All of that, we have learned on so many levels that to be a powerful woman is dangerous in this world. But the more of us that step into it, the world shifts and changes, the norms shift and change, what is acceptable shifts and changes. They can't get us all.
What you've just summed up there really feels to me to explain how we've just like fully embodied the secret witch archetype.
There's a quote from Pam Grossman, author of Waking the Witch, and she wrote a great article in Time magazine. I don't know if you can put a link to it in your show notes or if people just want to look it out. But it's a quote here from it where she says, "Being called a witch and calling oneself a witch are usually two vastly different experiences. In the first case, it is often an act of degradation, an attack against a perceived threat. The second is an act of reclamation, an expression of autonomy and pride." And so the witch wound is the fear of the first, is the fear of being called a witch. Whereas the reclaiming, the liberation of calling yourself witch is a freeing up of all of that fear and shame about what it means to be a powerful woman and taking it into your body and owning it. I came when we were supposed to be having this conversation a couple of months ago, and I had to cancel because I had migraine after migraine. And I had this absolute lightning bolt moment where I give myself a really hard time. I'm ill an awful lot, deal with chronic fatigue sort of stuff. I know you did too in the past, deal with a lot of migraines at the moment. I get very frustrated at the quote unquote weakness of my body. You know, I have lots of mental health stuff, which I now know is connected to being, you know, neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. And again, I give myself a hard time for not being strong enough, you know, being ill all the time. And it suddenly occurred to me, these words came through to me, and I want to share them with you. I am a strong and powerful woman. I know this with certainty after witnessing how many years it has taken me to get past my own defenses and inner resistance. Because so often when I would try to say, you know, you do an affirmation, I am a strong and powerful woman, and you're like, you know, but I don't really believe it. But fuck me, to have put up so many internal defenses that I haven't been able to get past myself. I am a strong and powerful woman, both to be able to put them up, but also to be able to get through them, you know.
Wow, I love that. Really love that. You've got such a way with words. It really speaks to my heart. So yeah, that is gorgeous. Well, we are coming up on the hour now, so gosh, I could keep talking to you all day, but I'm not gonna keep you. I don't know if there's anything we can just speak to around neurodivergence just to end, if people are suspecting that may be something that they are how can I phrase it, if they are feeling that that's them.
So what I would say is, and this isn't meant to be a sell buy my books, but like, you know, if you read Creatrix or Medicine Woman or She of the Sea, my three most recent books, since I've known that I was neurodivergent, you will both see what it's like, an internal experience of what it's like to be neurodivergent in the world. And a lot of people have identified themselves simply through reading them and realizing that it wasn't what they thought it was. But also in Creatrix specifically, a huge amount of the women who have contributed to that have discovered that they are neurodivergent themselves. So there's a lot of voices in there that are neurodivergent, which I know a lot of people have identified very strongly with. So I think the best thing to do is to immerse yourself in the world of real neurodivergence rather than the medicalized external view of it. Because the gateway in for a lot of people is the theory of the highly sensitive person, Elaine Aron, Aron. She gave voice to something that a lot of women who have since discovered that they are actually autistic or ADHD first identified themselves with. So that's a kind of a gateway thing, because you're not requiring any sort of medical, you know, diagnosis or anything. It's just okay, I tick a lot of these boxes. So first step of self-understanding. Then I would point people towards a blog post I did called I Am a Unicorn on my blog, lucyhpearce.com, which is a description of, it's my autistic coming out, public coming out, what autism looks and feels like for me, what the journey and process was to an extent. And then there are a huge amount of resources at the bottom of that post, mainly created by neurodivergent people. I just think go to source, go to people who live it and know it, rather than who only can identify it from the outside. So you'll find podcasts, you'll find articles, you'll find books there written by neurodivergent people. That's how you'll find out if you are or you're not. And there's no need to be diagnosed if you don't need a diagnosis for various reasons. If it just adds to your self-knowledge, then, you know, that is often all that's needed when you're an adult. Because services for adults are pretty pants, really. There isn't much. So, but just that self-knowledge is so vital, because a large part of our shadow, if we are neurodiverse, is our neurodivergent self. It's the part that we have been shamed about, we've been told is wrong. And the energy that is there, the gifts that are there that have been submerged and held in shadow, once we are able to find a way to express them in the world, is just so powerful for us and for everybody around us.
Thank you so much for that. And I know you asked me just before we were recording, you're like, are you neurodivergent? And I was like, I think I am. And I was like, yes, thank you for seeing my gift. So yeah, just knowing that it is a gift, I think is going to be so helpful to so
and
many,
it's, I don't want to sugarcoat it, like it's a gift that comes with enormous challenges. It's not like, woohoo, I'm autistic and everything's fabulous. Like, there are massive challenges that come with it, but they're the things that the world sees. The world doesn't tend to see the gifts, and we don't tend to be taught to see the gifts. And so I want to hold those things in balance whilst focusing on the gifts. But there are struggles, there are real life challenges and struggles that make daily life very different for those of us on the spectrum.
And it's so, yeah, so as you say, so crucial, so central to the witch as well. Gorgeous.
Can I finish with a few words from the end of Burning Woman? I just feel like it would be a really
please do
way to finish.
Thank you.
Okay, because we've been speaking a lot about the individual, and as I said early on, and I want to finish with this, like, you and I are talking here, people are listening. This is a collective thing. This isn't just about me. It isn't just about you. Like, this is a collective rising, a collective reclaiming of our power, of our energy, of our story as humans, a collective reclaiming of what has been put into the shadow of our species, not just as us as individuals. And the impact of that is far bigger than the individual too. I am, you are, a vital cell in the awakening feminine on Earth, a crucial component in consciousness realizing itself in form. Your experience is not insignificant. It is part of a larger awakening of the feminine incarnate. Nature is calling the women. We hear her birth cries. Around the world, women are gathering in red tents, in women's circles, in meetings and online. We are circling. These are burning times, and they call for burning women. Women embodying their passion, women feeling in their bodies, creative women, courageous women, connected women. Gather the women, run towards the flames. Gather the women, gather the men. Let burning women and burning men come together in ecstatic creative partnership, in dangerous acts of creative rebellion. Rip your clothes off. Run towards the flames and dance like there's no tomorrow to the beat of your own heart. Only you can hear the rhythm. Only you know its tune. Only your body can dance the way it knows. So do it. Stop holding back and waiting and trying to do it right and not upset anyone. I am there right beside you. I see your courage. I sense your power. I hear your voice. You are not alone. We are ready. We hold the torches. We circle. We are the carriers of life-giving flames. We burn from the inside. The feminine inflammation, a conflagration of sisters, burning away the bitter past and lighting the way to the future. It is time. Will you join us?
Wow, that's just divine. Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy. That's just, yeah, ooh, all the chills. Oh, that's glorious. So, where can people find you? Because I know they're going to want to. They're going to want to read all your books now. Sure.
So they can find me on my website, Lucy H Pearce, PEARCE.com. They can find me on Instagram at Lucy H Pearce. That's where I love to hang out and share my art and words and the changing seasons. And Womancraft Publishing is my publishing house that I set up and has lots of lovely witchy books. We've got Yoga for Witches, Kitchen Witch, Yin Magic, lots of Walking with Persephone, lots of lovely books of wild, wise women's voices there, as well as my own books. And then obviously online everywhere.
Amazing. I will include all of that with the show notes so that they can find you. Is there anything particularly you're working on that's juicy that you want to share with us?
I'm working on too much at the moment. I'd like to do a scale back of the quantity that I really believe that my brain can do at one go, and say, no, Lucy, this is unrealistic. I'm working on a book called Crow Moon. I am working on a series of calls for women who feel the call to write. I do a e-course called Your Authentic Voice, which is just finished, and really just want to offer more ways for women to enter the world of publishing and self-publishing. So I've got a writer's salon, of course, calls coming up, one a month in March, April and May. So that's what I'm working on.
All the magic. Thank you so much, Lucy. It's been a real pleasure, a real privilege. I was trying to say both at once. It just wasn't working.
Privilege.
Yeah, exactly. A pleasurable privilege to have you join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, this was my first guest who showed up fully naked, and I love that so much as it was just the most beautiful embodiment of our conversation. This show with Lucy was just filled with raw, natural and beautiful naked truth. My top takeaways are: we grow up in a world where we create lessons from our childhood experiences that the safest way to be in life is to be the good girl, and yet magic is created in discovering we can actually choose consciously to be ourselves. It's scary to show up naked, and there's often a lot of shame, and it feels like a genuine risk, but it's really the only way to live a life of soul, to have our full creative self-expression. The main thing to know is what we can choose into showing up as ourselves or not consciously. That's where the power is. At some point in life, we are initiated into our power, quite often in pregnancy, which is deeply connected to our creativity. Our womb is the creative cauldron of power. We are taught to be scared of the dark in all the ways, but it's actually a place where we transform, and what can help us is becoming familiar with the sensations and going gently. There's a real parallel between witches and neurodivergent brains, and there's a gift in this. Witches get really good at masking it though. Being able to mask and shapeshift means we are also really good at embodying archetypes so that we can embrace the fullness of the witch and be our true selves. The witch wound is a fear of being called a witch, but by owning ourselves as the witch, we are reclaiming the power in it. Being a witch is really a symbol of our feminine power. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.